welcome back to another episode of the Empowerful Health Podcast. Today, I am on location. I'm up in, where am I at? Sandy, Utah, right, Chad? Sandy, Utah, with a good friend of mine, Dr. Chad Frandsen. Dr. Chad and I met each other day one of chiropractic school, or day one for me. You were doing undergrad classes. I've known him ever since. We were neighbors. I've known him for a long time. So welcome to the podcast, Chad. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're going to talk about a couple different things. He's going to share a little story about how he got into chiropractic, and then we're going to talk about what's the phrasing you used, owning your choice. I'm very excited. So let's dive right in. So how did you come into, particularly we both practice the same. We practice NUCA chiropractic. How did that come about? Tell me a little bit of your story.
Well, when I was 18, I was in a car accident and stopped at a red light. Somebody rear-ended me. And at that time, I didn't get any treatment because I had been to a chiropractor years before, and I didn't understand the value of it. But at the same time, the guy wanted me to come back 3 times a week, and I didn't really have a problem at that time.
Right.
And so I decided, well, I think I'll be okay. And then...
is this the same guy that had your whole family on like a big plan?
Yeah,
and
so the family...
spent a lot of money.
My mom had a problem, so he had the whole family come in, and he put us on the family plan. We could go as many times as we wanted for a year. So we were in his office probably at least twice a week for an entire year. And it was fine. I can't say I got injured or anything, but to me it was kind of, after looking back at that year, I didn't go in with a problem.
Right.
And I didn't come out with a problem.
Which is good.
It was nice. He's a nice guy.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with seeking chiropractic before we have a problem, but maybe not as frequently.
Right. And just for the whole family.
Right.
And we were going in very often. So I didn't really have a lot of pain. So I'm like, well, what is that? I didn't understand what chiropractic was.
Sure.
And so after that, I decided to leave the country. I went on a mission for a couple of years. I was in Taiwan riding my bicycle around, and when I got home, I was just a mess. I hadn't been sleeping very well. I had some pain, and so I went to the medical doctor, and I don't know, a lot of people experience this after sharing this story, but they go in there and they put you on an antidepressant, and you're
right.
like, oh, okay, I thought I was having problems sleeping. Maybe I'm depressed. Maybe who knows? But I didn't really love that. I tried to take their antidepressant drugs for a while. When it came right down to it, I just didn't feel well on them. I'm like, I don't really want to live life like this.
Well, especially at that age,
right.
Like that's not a permanent solution, right?
And the doctor kind of told me that I would be on it forever. He's like, well, you're chemically imbalanced. And so if you don't take this, you're going to have some reoccurring episodes or whatever. But my mother had always kind of been anti medicine for some reason, especially psych meds.
Sure.
Because, I don't know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and it seems like a lot of my friends, maybe not a lot of them, but many of them were on Ritalin.
Right.
They'd go down before lunch and get their pill from the office. And anyway, my mom had strong feelings against that. I didn't really know that at the time.
Well, there was a trend, and it's still sometimes, that if you behave differently, there must be something wrong. Let's diagnose and give you something to make you behave like everyone else.
Right.
Which they're not downplaying, medicines. There's a place and a time for all of them, but everyone is not the place
right.
and all the time.
So I tried it for a while. I still wasn't sleeping very well.
Sure.
And while I'd been gone, my parents had become aware of a doctor. He had a radio show, and my mom had been listening to him quite a bit. And she says, I'm going to go take you down to see this chiropractor, and we're going to see what he does. I went down to him. I was like, yeah, what's he going to do? But I was pleasantly surprised. He took some x-rays and said, when was the car accident? Well, at that point, I hadn't been thinking about a car accident. I was thinking about I hadn't been sleeping.
Right.
I had some anxiety about it. Because after you don't sleep for a while, you get anxious.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, is this going to be like this forever?
Sure. Well, and then every time you lay down, you're anxious because you don't go
right.
to sleep, and you wake up because you're tired. Yeah, it's just a vicious cycle.
And you've, I think, experienced some of that.
Right. Last night. No, I'm just kidding.
So anytime you have anxiety about something, it's
right.
probably,
it makes it worse.
It's probably not good. So Anyway, my mother was paying for the visit, and
Sure.
she's like, we're going to do this. I'm like, okay. So he took some x-rays, he analyzed them, and he worked very gently at the top of my neck. And I thought, there's no way in heck this is doing anything. This is bogus. But when I got off the table, I felt different. It was a subtle difference. I didn't think it was going to help me with everything, but I thought,
Sure.
this feels different. Something happened here. But when I went home that night and fell asleep, I didn't wake up till like 8 o'clock the next morning. So the sun was actually shining in the window, and it wasn't 2 a.m. and I wasn't pacing the floor. So
That's awesome.
that was awesome. And then I started to heal. And then I had some interesting conversations with this doctor, and he sat me down and just talked to me about the pros and cons of different treatments. And he, I don't know, he changed the way I think about life, about medicine, because I don't know, up till that point, I thought, I was living in Taiwan. They kind of have this Eastern philosophy.
Sure.
And the whole time I was in Taiwan, I'm like, man, Western medicine has to be so much better.
And occasionally it is, right?
If I'm bleeding to death, yes, take me to the hospital.
Having a heart attack, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
But at that point, I had to make a choice what I was going to do, and I decided just not to take those meds anymore.
Nice.
And I luckily got better.
Good.
Now, for some people, I think it's, I'm not saying that what I do is right for everybody.
Absolutely. But it's good to question, and it's good to
Right.
look for other options. Sometimes we're told things by a doctor, and doctors have a lot of confidence, and they'll tell
Right.
people you'll need to be on this the rest of your life. And it may be true, and it may not be true.
Right.
There are other options out there, and I love that. I like what you said here a second ago too about how when you sat there, he took x-rays and he asked when was the accident, and you hadn't made the connection.
Right.
Because there's usually a gap, right? We have an accident when we're young. I say we're like Rubbermaid. We bounce right back. For our younger listeners, it used to be the ads for Rubbermaid, right?
For sure.
It would bounce back. You could hit the trash can with your car and it would pop back into its shape, you
Right.
know? And young people seem to be like that. They get in an accident, you're sore for a couple days, maybe a couple
sure.
weeks. You get better, and then it's hard for them to connect 5 years down the road. Everything's falling apart. Hey, it might have come from this neck injury.
Right. And so he made that connection for me because I wasn't thinking about the accident at all. I was just thinking, man, I have a lot of anxiety. I'm not sleeping well. And what's wrong with my brain?
Right.
I wasn't thinking about what's happening at the base of my brain with,
Well, blood flow to the brain,
Right.
cerebral spinal fluid, all these sorts of things.
all kinds of things can happen.
Which is an interesting thing. I'm sure you run into this a lot, is like people will come to us as chiropractors and doctors being able to told them there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you.
Right.
Here's an antidepressant. Here's anti-anxiety meds. Here's a blood pressure med. Even though you don't have high blood pressure, one of the side effects is that it might help with the symptoms you're
Right.
experiencing, this sort of stuff. And the thing is that doctors are right in that they can't find anything wrong. But they're wrong in that there's not anything wrong, right? There are other things that doctors aren't trained to look at, like misalignments of the spine, nutritional deficiencies, lots of things that doctors don't look at.
A lot of my patients come in. I have several PI patients come in after car accidents.
Nice.
And oftentimes they will go to the hospital after an accident, and they will have all kinds of imaging done. And the images, the radiology report will say, you're fine. And so they go home and they take muscle relaxers and pain pills for a few days, and they're not fine.
Right.
And if they look in the mirror, they're standing completely out of balance because the person looking at those radiographs were not looking for an imbalanced posture. They were looking for fractures,
Tumors,
and torn
big
ligaments
things,
and things like that.
absolutely.
So,
Yep.
and so even though structurally things seem sound, things are off.
Well, because most medical testing is designed to look for big things.
Right.
Not for little subtle things like, and some of it, they're shifting. More holistic doctors are looking at like, you're not diabetic, but you're going to be because
Right.
these numbers are starting to get high, though they're not in range. So there are some that look a little bit bigger picture, but with MRIs, CTs, things like that, x-rays, most of the time they're just looking for something big. They don't see the big thing. Here's some.
And I
pickles.
have, several patients. I have an interesting book in my lobby that called Hair, Skin, and Nails. And the body is actually giving you signs of things way before it ends up in the blood or way before you feel things. And
Sure.
I have a lot of patients come in and they're like, I just found out what my problem was. I'm like, what? Where'd you find it? In this book.
Huh.
My nails are doing this, or my skin does this, or my tongue, or whatever.
Interesting.
And
Sure.
this little book is just so helpful for a lot of people because, I don't know, it's just the body is telling us what's wrong.
So the book's called Hair, Skin, and Nails. Do you know who wrote it? Or
I can get that information. I think it's...
we'll throw it in the notes of the podcast here. Don't worry about it right this second. So.
Okay. Well, it's right here.
Perfect. Oh, it's literally right outside
The Skin, Tongue...
The Skin, Tongue, and Nails Speak by Donna Burka Wild. So you've had quite a few patients get responses from it. That's awesome. Well, and there's so many outside the box. You know, it's funny because when I first went to chiropractic school, I was like, I'm not going to be one of those crazy chiropractors that like looks at things. But the more I've seen in practice and the more I've just heard from patients will come tell me all the time, I did X, Y, and Z, and this is helping me with some of these other issues. And
Right.
as I've learned more and more, there's so much to this. I mean, this isn't the book that's going to fix everyone's problems.
No.
But it may give some more insights into that.
Right.
And that's the cool thing about health is we always need to be asking more questions. If we sit there, we assume we know everything about the body, and we assume doctors do, but any good doctor is going to tell you we know very little relatively as a healthcare profession, you know, as chiropractors, but as all healthcare, if we combine all that, there's still a lot of stuff we don't understand about the body. And so the more we're just seeking other things, looking at different perspectives, the more we're going to better understand our body because there's no the body. Every body's built a little different.
Right.
And so the more perspectives we get, what works for me may not work for you. We were just talking about this actually over lunch, like marriage dynamics. You know, we're both married. We both have 5 kids. Do you have 5 kids too?
5 kids.
And we're talking about like the dynamics you and your wife have wouldn't work in my marriage, and my dynamics with my wife wouldn't work in your marriage, you know?
Right.
It's the same with relationships as it is with our body. The relationship that you have with your body wouldn't work for me to have with my body. I have to figure my body out because it's going to operate differently.
Right.
And I find the more perspectives we get, the more we open our minds and seek other professionals, the more accurate or the better I understand it. And
there are, in the past, I would have written off a lot of maybe what other chiropractors do.
Right.
I have some family members who have had some great results with some muscle testing techniques.
Nice.
NAET.
I love NAET. Yep.
Getting, they were tested positive for celiac, had been for 20 years. They're at a point now where they can eat gluten. I'm not saying that, they should eat a ton of it, but
Sure.
but it doesn't make them severely ill when they come in contact with it. So there's just a lot out there.
And just for anyone listening, if you're curious what that is, it's an NAET. It's called Nombutripod's Allergy Elimination Technique. They're providers all over the place. Dr. Chad actually recommended it for me. I've been doing that for a while down in Arizona. He knows some good practitioners here in Utah, but things like that, that I think the one you've seen is a chiropractor, right?
Yeah, he's a chiropractor.
I love when we go to other chiropractors to seek help too, but there's so much stuff like that that's not mainstream that helps a lot of people.
So as a chiropractor, people always come in and ask me, should I get this? Should I do that? And I always ask them, I ask them, you need to study it out. You need to figure out, and you need to own whatever you choose.
Right.
So be it, you should never feel forced to do anything.
Right.
But, there are so many things out there that work for so many people, and they don't work for all people. What I do doesn't work for everybody.
Yep.
But luckily, probably 80% of the people that come into my office get some great relief and do much better.
I love that. Well, and that concept that we wanted to talk about today of owning your choice, I interviewed a patient of mine, not on the podcast. I want to get her on the podcast, but she's nervous to be recorded, but we sat down and had an interview because she's one of my favorite patients, and she's gotten some of the best results of any patient I've had, and not just in my office. If I ever make another recommendation to her, she does it. If I say, go see this physical therapist or go see this naturopath or go do this different thing, she always does it, and she's been very successful in that. She's defined herself as the kind of person that's going to do it. So I sat down and interviewed her, and I said, you're one who does, and I'm always impressed by that. How do you do that? Like, what do you do? When I give you a recommendation, what do you do? Do you just immediately call them? She says, no, I go online. I read every word on their website. I research. I make sure I own that decision, that I'm informed, which I loved. Like, I don't want to be in charge of her health. I don't
Right.
want to be in charge of anyone's health other than my own, right?
Right.
And even then, I'd love to abdicate that, but no, just kidding. But no, like I'm not in charge of patients' health. They are. I can be a great resource, but I want them to have ownership, and ownership comes from education,
Right.
educating, learning, processing. So when people come and ask our opinions on stuff, there's certain things where we can give opinions on. There's certain things we really shouldn't. We're not, medical doctors. We don't have that types of training like drugs, vaccinations, that sort of stuff. But we can, connect them with resources and say, have you read about it? Have you looked at X, Y, and Z? And the more informed people are, the better they're going to own those decisions.
For sure. That makes it so you can own it.
Right. And a key with owning it is continuing to do it.
Right.
I'm sure you've had those people that come in and they've seen a dozen different chiropractors, physical therapists, and they go see each of them for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then, well, this isn't working. So they try something new.
Right.
It's like owning a decision is doing the research, feeling confident, and then sticking with it long enough to get results.
Yeah. Because a lot of them, they'll filter through our offices as well.
Right.
2 weeks later, they're like, well, this didn't work either.
Yeah, we didn't fix 40 years worth of problems in 2 weeks. We must be terrible chiropractors.
Right.
I've had a few conversations with people like, I usually say, well, when did this start? How long ago did this start? And sometimes it started a couple weeks ago, but like you saw in the x-rays, we can see the damage 50, 60 years later.
Right.
I can look at the x-ray and say, yeah, I know you've been having this pain for 10 years, but your x-rays say the injury was 50 years ago. And they're like, well, I'm just getting older. It's like, no, I x-rayed another 60-year-old yesterday that didn't look anything like this.
They didn't have anything.
They were doing much better because they didn't have the same traumas and accidents you had, So having that understanding that when we feel a symptom, it's just starting, but the problem started a long time ago. And that could be spinal, but that could be, like you said, with the skin, tongue, nails. The problem could be going on a long time before it shows up in the blood. What did they say? I heard some statistic yesterday. 80% of cancer's lifespan is unknown. Like it's in anonymous, as they call it. We're only aware of 20% of it usually. By the time it's detected and started treatments, it's 20% of its lifespan. So a lot of health problems build under the surface before we ever have an inkling of pain, symptoms, blood pressure, any of that kind of stuff.
I have a 92-year-old patient that comes in to see me regularly.
Nice.
She stands up straight. She's, if you saw her at the store, you would think she was in her mid-70s. And she told me one day, she's like, you never know what's growing in you. What do you mean? She said, yeah, 12 years ago, I had a cancerous tumor in me. Like I had it out and I never knew it was there.
Crazy.
And so, we really don't know.
We don't. We have to do the best we have with what we got, right? Yeah.
Anyway, great to talk to you today, Dr.
You too,
Kerrigan.
Chad. Thanks for being on here. He's got to get back with patients, but we appreciate him. Like I said, his practice is Wasatch Spinal Care. So if anyone's up in Utah looking for a great chiropractor, he also does a lot of work with nutrition, lots of recommendations on that as well. So thanks, Chad.
Thank you.